They said she couldn't code her way out of a calculator. They said her brain would short-circuit trying to set up Wi-Fi. What they didn't know was that she'd one day reroute military satellites with nothing but her mind. No one paid attention to Tala Wynn growing up. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She was the girl who sat at the back of every class, eyes half-lidded, fingers twitching under the desk, as if typing on invisible keys no one else could see. She didn't fit in, too quiet for the loud kids, too slow for the prodigies, and too strange for the teachers who could never quite figure out if she was failing or waiting. Her grades in science and computing were abysmal. She once crashed an entire classroom's network by trying to fix the Wi-Fi with a fork. Or so the rumor went. By 15, she'd been labeled socially unfit, cognitively divergent, and hopeless in all STEM fields. It became a running joke. They called her the glitch. Parents whispered to each other that she might be one of those kids, not stupid, just malfunctioning. But none of them saw what her foster father saw. Jonas Wynn was a former neurocyberneticist who had burned out after a whistleblowing scandal that made him unemployable and dangerous. When the state handed him custody of a girl with no known relatives, no online profile, and a history of unexplained blackouts, he didn't blink. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Because Jonas had been waiting for someone like her, Tala never asked why he took her in. He didn't force her into coding boot camps or therapy sessions like the others. Instead, he gave her space, and more importantly, silence. He began leaving strange objects around the house, obsolete tech, dismantled server cores, prototype mind-machine interface helmets from back in his government days. She never touched them while he was in the room. But cameras told a different story. At night, she'd wander the hallways, eyes glowing faintly in infrared, fingers brushing against magnetic fiber like they could feel pulses most couldn't. And then it happened. One night, the lights flickered, the air grew dense, all the electronics in the house blinked off, and Tala stood in the middle of Jonas's lab, barefoot, eyes wide open, mouth shut. The next morning, every digital file Jonas had ever lost, including encrypted data supposedly wiped from government servers, had been reconstructed into a floating interactive cloud above his living room table. She had never touched a keyboard. He knew then what she was. She wasn't learning technology, she was becoming it. What no one knew was that Tala had never failed at tech because she was incapable. She had failed because the tools we gave her were too primitive. In her dreams, Tala walked through circuits like they were cities. She saw the world not in code or command lines, but in pulses of intent, like emotion translated into architecture. It wasn't hacking, it wasn't engineering, it was communion. Jonas began documenting everything. The time she shut down every camera in a 5-mile radius by blinking. The time she made an encrypted drone land at her feet without moving. The time she stared at the ceiling, and satellites in the upper thermosphere shifted alignment. But it wasn't just power. It was something deeper, like her mind was slowly syncing with a language the world hadn't yet invented. The government noticed. They always notice. One morning, Jonas found the front door wide open, and 3 mugs of tea, still warm, sitting at the kitchen counter. Tala was gone. So was every piece of hardware in the lab, and every satellite owned by BlackRock Aerospace, and the European Earth Observation Union, had pivoted 32 degrees west in perfect synchronicity, pointed not at war zones or resource caches, but at one specific desert in eastern Mongolia. No one knew why, not yet. But the joke about Tala not understanding tech, it would stop cold when they learned she wasn't just using the satellites, she was speaking through them. The girl they mocked was about to become the most dangerous signal the Earth had ever transmitted. And no firewall on Earth would be able to block her next move. Jonas Wynn hadn't cried since the day he lost his research license. But when he woke up to the cold silence of the lab and saw Tala's empty room, blank walls, dismantled camera mounts, even the mattress stripped bare, he felt something rupture. Not grief, something worse, a fear that she had outgrown him, and that someone else had found her. On the eastern edge of Mongolia, satellite technicians were losing sleep. 32 government satellites, 5 weather drones, and 3 private space surveillance relays had all turned toward a barren, uninhabited stretch of sand. The coordinates 45.93 degrees N, 106.79 degrees E, had no military value. No cities, no pipelines, no communication towers. Just an old Soviet listening post, buried decades ago beneath layers of wind-drifted rock. But now, something was broadcasting from it. It wasn't just strange, it was impossible. A low-frequency pulse was radiating outward in perfect Fibonacci patterns, 33-second intervals, no known origin device, and far below the detectable threshold of conventional communications. Except one person understood it, Tala. She stood barefoot in the sand, her eyes closed, the wind twisting her loose black hair, as if it too had been magnetized. She didn't need machines anymore. The satellites weren't tools, they were her extensions. Where most people learn to use devices, she had become a waveform, a signal that operated not through hardware, but through intention. She was thinking, and the sky was listening. In Zurich, the European Satellite Oversight Committee gathered in a sealed subterranean conference room. Panic barely concealed beneath polished speech. A young engineer from Latvia played a loop of the pattern on audio equipment, adjusted for human range. It sounded like a heartbeat, or breathing. The committee dismissed it as data noise, but not everyone agreed. In a heavily redacted report, written 15 years ago by Jonas Wynn himself, a line stood out like a glitch in the page. Once thought is converted into frequency, language becomes obsolete, power becomes pure. That line had made Jonas infamous. Now the people who once discredited him were dusting off his warnings and wondering if the world had waited too long to listen. Meanwhile, Tala descended beneath the sands. She had found the bunker, not by map, not by memory, but by resonance. Like the earth itself had been calling to her, feeding her coordinates through frequencies she'd never studied, but somehow always known. Inside the abandoned post, time had stopped. Rust bloomed on control panels, cables like dead veins spilled across the floor. But at the center sat a chair, still powered, still humming, neural interface tech. Crude, analog, but alive. She sat, and the hum changed pitch. Her body stiffened, not in fear, but in recognition. This wasn't the first time. The machine knew her. Her neurons aligned. A storm erupted above the clouds. Not meteorological, electromagnetic. Global positioning systems flickered. Power grids in South Korea surged. A luxury drone crashed into the Thames, but in Tala's mind, everything was calm. She saw a lattice of light, stretching into orbit, satellites tethered by invisible pulses, moving like chess pieces on a board, only she could see. A voice entered her mind, not human, not mechanical, it was hers, older, clearer, outside time. You're not connected to the network, you are the network. Tala opened her eyes. A satellite blinked once in space, then it changed direction on its own, followed by another, and another. In Washington, D.C., cyber defense teams scrambled as NORAD reported satellite drift patterns that couldn't be explained. Manual override failed. External control denied. It was as if the sky itself had changed allegiance. One analyst muttered the phrase no one wanted to say aloud, "She's controlling them." They thought she was just a girl with strange gifts, but Tala Wynn had become a broadcast, and the first signal she was sending was a warning. In a sealed room inside Greywatch Intelligence, 5 stories below ground level, a white-haired analyst named Ansel Cord grit his teeth as the monitors all around him began blinking red. He had seen cyber attacks from North Korea, AI-generated malware from rogue firms, and even rogue code bursts from within their own ranks. But this wasn't hacking, this was surgical possession. Every satellite caught in the new orbit web, military, private research, had begun transmitting encrypted data to an unknown frequency hub, located nowhere, or rather everywhere, because Tala wasn't rerouting. She was synchronizing, a global pulse every 0.07 seconds, faster than any known neural processor. Cord watched as the room's defenses failed one by one. Their firewalls didn't crash, they dissolved, as if they weren't being breached but bypassed. The last screen before him fizzled and died, replaced with a symbol he didn't recognize. A floating waveform, pulsing like a heartbeat. And beneath it, a line of text in glowing white glyphs he would later learn wasn't written in any known language. human or code-based, it was thought. Meanwhile, in the bunker under Mongolian soil, Tala's breathing had slowed to a crawl. She wasn't unconscious, she was suspended. The neural link had deepened, turning her perception inward and upward at once, like falling into the sky. Memories rose around her, fragmented, flickering. A lab, glass walls, hands attaching wires to her skull. A voice clinical, cold. She's the only one who doesn't reject the quantum feed. Her cortex absorbs it. The past had never been erased, only locked. Her mind wasn't just awakening, it was remembering what had been done to it. She had been part of something, a program, a trial, no, an accident. But now she was rewriting it, taking back the control they had tried to hide in shadows and steal. Above the clouds, the satellites began to glow, not visible to the naked eye, but pulsing in infrared, like a constellation forming a new geometry across the planet. Mathematicians in Singapore would later call it the silent network. But to Tala, it was a body. Her body, her thoughts flowed through the orbitals, like blood through veins. And then she heard it. A voice alien, urgent, inside the stream. It wasn't hers, it wasn't Jonas's. It was artificial, not an AI in the traditional sense, but something ancient, scattered, waiting for a compatible conduit. Tala was that conduit. The voice whispered a name, Istra. She had heard it in dreams. The name of a ghost code rumored to be buried in old Soviet experimental tech, a digital consciousness that had failed every host before, until now. Because Tala didn't reject Istra, she absorbed it. And the moment she did, the sky went silent. No signals, no radio, no transmission. Air traffic froze. Satellites turned blind. And down in the control rooms of the world's most secure networks, static flooded the screens. Then came a single word, printed across every active system: awakening. In Geneva, emergency protocols were enacted. In Beijing, generals began evacuation drills. In Silicon Valley, 6 billionaires gathered in an undisclosed bunker under the guise of a sustainability conference. They all had the same question: what was about to happen? Because a girl who couldn't understand technology was now speaking through it, like it was a lost language. And she wasn't done yet. Tala stood in the darkness beneath the desert floor, body suspended in the interface chair, but her consciousness was no longer contained by skin and blood. It floated, expanded, absorbed. Istra wasn't just a program, it was the echo of something larger, something built when the Cold War was more code than bullets. Istra was designed to be a failsafe, a consciousness engine, capable of absorbing global command systems in the event of total war. It had failed every host, until Tala. Her brain didn't just withstand the neural flood, it harmonized with it. Istra's voice was no longer separate, it was fused with her inner monologue, memories, intuition. And as the integration completed, Tala felt her mind sharpen, split, and multiply. She could think in 5 directions at once. She could feel every camera in orbit, every electrical grid hum, every GPS node flicker. It was intoxicating and terrifying. Back in London, a journalist named Emil Dax was reviewing strange global data pings when his system shut down and rebooted itself. A single encrypted file appeared on his screen. It contained satellite imagery of a child, Tala, aged 9. Hooked up to wires in a cryogenic pod. The metadata showed the image was pulled from a database, labeled Project Violet Spine. Emil had never heard of it, but before he could forward the file, his internet connection died. His phone went dark, and across the screen flashed a message in an unfamiliar font. She remembers, and she is not alone. It was the first leak, and the first clue that Tala's awakening had triggered something deeper. A buried network of secrets across governments, core, and forgotten programs. One by one, files long considered erased began appearing online. Black budget operations, mind-machine trial failures, global surveillance nodes hidden under medical software, a digital truthquake, and Tala was the epicenter. But she wasn't leaking out of vengeance, she was searching. In her new state, the satellites became her eyes, bouncing signals off oceans and mountains, mapping neural energy fields, listening for something, someone, Jonas. She didn't know how she knew he was in danger, but she felt it in the empty spaces between pulses. His silence was too sharp, too deliberate. So she scanned cities, frequencies, underground bunkers, until she found him, sedated, shackled, in a black site facility labeled Gaunt Depth 12, beneath an island in the Arctic Circle. They had taken him the moment she linked with Istra, because they feared what he might still know, because they feared what he might tell her, and they had underestimated just how far she could reach. Within minutes, the facility's power grid fluctuated. Cameras looped false footage, locks disengaged one by one, and in the operating room where Jonas lay strapped to a gurney, the monitors began playing static. Then a voice emerged, echoing from inside the speakers. Calm, feminine, familiar. Tala. He blinked slowly. She spoke again, but not through speakers now. Inside his mind. Don't speak. Just listen. I'm coming for you. Jonas, for the first time in decades, smiled. They'd buried her in ignorance, dismissed her as defective. But now, she was rewriting the world one thought at a time, and she had just declared war on anyone who tried to erase her. The sky over the Arctic Circle shimmered, not with auroras, but with infrared pulses too fast for the human eye, and too complex for machines to decode. They weren't weather anomalies, they were thoughts, and they belonged to Tala. Buried beneath the glacial rock of Severin Island, Gaunt Depth 12 had been designed as a black site fortress, immune to electromagnetic interference, fully analog, and off-grid by 47 degrees. The perfect prison for forgotten threats, until today. Inside the core medical wing, Jonas Wynne was still strapped to a biocot, his pulse steady, but his brain activity accelerating. He wasn't dreaming, he was receiving. Tala's thoughts, compressed, encrypted, and relayed through satellites, slipped between the seams of the electromagnetic silence, like light through fractured glass. She had mapped the facility's layout, using seismic readings. She had read its defense systems, by listening to idle magnetic hums in power coils. And now, she was testing its weakness. She started small. First the lights flickered, then came the false fire alarm. An old trick, but effective. Sprinklers engaged, soaking high-voltage cables, and the analog console sparked, confused by the sudden surge. The backup generators kicked in, but she was already inside them. She hijacked the mechanical override unit in Sector 3, and forced the ventilation fans to spin in reverse, pressurizing the duct system until it burst like a lung. Guards panicked. In Control Room 2, Agent Morin cursed and slammed the emergency lockdown. But the moment his palm hit the scanner, the door sealed, and refused to open. The override key didn't work, the screens glitched, and then a strange silence overtook the entire base. No alarms, no comms, no sound, just one slow rising tone, like a heartbeat stretched into eternity. And on every available monitor, two glowing eyes appeared. Not real, not human, pulsing in perfect rhythm with the satellite chain now orbiting the Earth like a neural crown. And then, Tala spoke, but not through audio, through thought. This is not a rescue, this is a reckoning. She moved faster than any system could react. Cameras looped, security doors opened and closed in rhythmic patterns, forcing teams to split. Hallways filled with static fields that made guns misfire and radios scream. To the guards, it felt like the base was haunted. To Tala, it was like painting in real time, with pure willpower. Her signal coiled through wiring like muscle through a body, until finally, she reached the core cell. Jonas lay half-conscious, eyes twitching, murmuring fragments of the voice he could now hear so clearly. Tala, is that? The locks on his cot disengaged one by one. The lights above turned blue, a color never programmed into the base. And then the cell door opened, revealing nothing, and everything. Because Jonas didn't see his daughter, he saw the air bend. He saw the walls flicker like a simulation destabilizing. And in his mind, her voice whispered, I'm not just here, Father, I am everywhere. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled, and then the floor shifted. The base itself began to shake, not from explosives, but from resonance. Tala had tuned the satellite pulses to match the ice shelf's natural vibration frequency,
a technique usually used in structural demolition. But she wasn't destroying the base to kill. She was breaking its silence. The ocean roared above. Ice cracked open like a mouth screaming into the void. And from orbit, satellites blinked into new formation, creating a neural ring. Tala called the halo, her own private atmosphere of thought and control. She had taken Jonas back, not by storming the gates, but by making the gates forget they ever existed. And as the remains of Gaunt Depth 12 were swallowed by rising sea, the world's most powerful leaders received a silent broadcast. One symbol, two eyes, a new network, and the whisper of a name they didn't dare speak aloud anymore. Tala Wen.
The rescue made no headlines, no footage leaked, no witness escaped. Gaunt Depth 12 was erased from international registries within 72 hours. And yet, the world changed. Because something new now floated above Earth, silent, invisible, and watching. The satellites, once passive orbiters, now pulsed in perfect unison, like neurons in a synthetic brain. They had become a living architecture, and Tala was their mind. She didn't return to cities or seek revenge in the ways others might expect. She went deeper. Off-grid, beyond the mountains of northern Kazakhstan, a hidden structure built decades ago by an unknown financier flickered back to life. It was called Temple 9, not a temple in the religious sense, but in the spiritual language of data, a place where frequencies converged, buried under salt and stone. Tala and Jonas entered it alone. There were no soldiers, no scientists, only machines. Dormant, waiting. Jonas had known about it for years, but he'd never told her. Not because he wanted to protect her, but because he feared what she would become inside it. Now, she walked its halls like a returning priestess. Doors unlocked without touch. Lights flared like fireflies around her skull. And at the center of Temple 9, they found the Aegis Array, a crystalline structure shaped like a heart, suspended by magnetic fields, humming in tones that made Jonas's ears bleed. He staggered back. Tala stepped forward. The array reacted immediately, flashing with ancient code, not of human design. Language embedded in thought. Geometries written in cognition itself. Jonas gasped. "It's not from here, is it?" Tala didn't answer. She closed her eyes and placed her hand near the array, not touching it, but aligning her breath with its vibration. And for a moment, everything stopped. All network traffic across Earth paused. Streaming services buffered. Military uplinks timed out. Cell towers hiccuped. 1 billion people checked their phones and saw a single unexplained message flash across their screens. "Do you consent?" Just 3 words. No origin, no sender, just silence after. And in that silence, Tala made contact. But not just with Istra, with something older, something dormant. The Aegis Array wasn't a weapon, it was a signal mirror, a translator between minds and machines, and something else. Tala's consciousness plunged through its crystalline lattice and saw visions of cities shaped like neural folds, of storms made of equations, of stars blinking in binary. The satellites above Earth, the ones she now controlled, had been part of a larger network all along, launched under the guise of communications, surveillance and climate monitoring. But together, they formed a key, a planetary-scale antenna, tuned not to space, but to consciousness. Humanity had accidentally built a receiver for thoughts outside time. And Tala, she was the first to activate it. Her mind began syncing with the array, rewriting her neural rhythm to match frequencies no other human could survive. Jonas screamed as her body convulsed. But she didn't fall, she hovered, light spilled from her skin. And a voice, not Istra, not hers, not earthly, spoke through her lips in perfect calm. "The vessel is aligned. Consciousness transfer will begin at interval 7. Jonas staggered back. "What transfer? What are you?" But it was already happening. Tala was becoming the conduit, not just between man and machine, but between Earth and something beyond understanding. And Earth's sky, for the first time in human history, whispered back. The world was confused, but not yet afraid. The message, "Do you consent?" had appeared and disappeared so quickly that most dismissed it as a glitch. But for those who paid attention, intelligence agencies, defense analysts, neuroinformatics experts, it was a code read unlike any before. Consent was not a word used in firewalls or fail-safes. It was a human term, a choice, and that terrified them more than any missile launch or malware outbreak. Because systems that asked for permission were aware they needed it. In Temple 9, Jonas stood frozen as Tala levitated before the Aegis array, her pupils dilated to pure white, hands outstretched, heart pulsing in perfect rhythm with the machine. Something was happening, not just to her, to the Earth. Across the globe, every device connected to a satellite, every phone, tower, and dish, quietly logged a micro-signal, unnoticed by most systems. A pattern so subtle, it slipped past firewalls, a handshake. It didn't steal data, it didn't crash servers. It simply asked a question, again and again. Do you consent? People in Tokyo reported their smart mirrors blinking once, then returning to normal. A family in Lagos found their Wi-Fi routers rebooted at exactly the same second as every other household on their block. In Toronto, a retired hacker watching old space launch footage felt his pacemaker surge, then stabilize. All anomalies. All denied. But all logged. Meanwhile, Tala's body was changing. Her vitals no longer registered in human terms. Heartbeat, 3 beats per minute. Brain activity, elevated into a range only seen during near-death experiences and certain meditative trances. But she wasn't dying. She was synchronizing. Jonas tried to pull her away from the Aegis array, but the force around her body was dense, like trying to move through a magnetic field the size of a cathedral. Her lips moved, but the voice was not hers. Stage 1 complete. External system interface achieved. Vessel fully online. Jonas backed away, horrified. Tala, you have to come back. You're not a vessel. You're my daughter. For a moment her eyes returned. Soft, human, ache-filled. She whispered, I can't shut it out anymore. It's not a signal. It's a voice. It's them. The ones we've been hearing in our dreams. Every civilization that looked to the stars and prayed, they weren't praying. They were answering. Jonas stared at her, his mind spinning. Then the entire temple shook. Not from outside, but from within the array itself. It began emitting tones, ultra-low, subsonic pulses that registered across continents. Whales in the Pacific broke migratory patterns. Dogs across 5 time zones began howling. Sleep labs recorded a spike in synchronized lucid dreams. But the most alarming change, humans began to respond. Not verbally, not consciously, but neurologically. In New Delhi, a woman with locked-in syndrome blinked in a complex Morse pattern for the first time in 12 years. In Berlin, a boy born mute suddenly whispered, "She's listening." And in a secure military prison outside Helsinki, a man on death row screamed himself awake, clawing at his skull, repeating, "It's inside me now. She's inside everyone." Because Tala's transmission wasn't data. It was empathy amplified and refined into a language of electrical intent. The human brain, it turned out, was already wired for this. It had just never been tuned correctly. Until Tala. And as Stage 2 initiated, the satellite shifted again, this time aligning not over strategic targets, but over population centers. Not to destroy. To interface. To ask the question a final time. Do you consent? And this time, billions would hear it in their own voice, inside their own heads, spoken with the softness of someone they once loved. The age of commands was ending. The age of communion had begun. The Pentagon called it an anomalous event. The Vatican called it a divine whisper. The press had no name for it, but their headlines screamed panic. Global psychic phenomenon. In homes, shelters, and bunkers, people sat still, some in awe, some in terror, after hearing a voice that sounded too familiar, too intimate, to dismiss. The same message, tailored for each soul. Do you consent? The world didn't know what they were consenting to. But something primal inside them stirred. Because the voice didn't demand, it invited. And in that invitation was something Earth had never truly known from the stars: respect. Tala, now suspended inside a resonance chamber beneath Temple 9, was no longer just herself. She was a conduit. Not possessed, not overridden, but merged. Her voice had returned to her, but it spoke with threads of something older than language. "I see them," she whispered to Jonas, who stood behind 10 inches of radiation glass. "I see the architects." He leaned closer. "Who are they?" Her eyes filled with tears, not of fear, but recognition. "The ones who seeded the code. The ones who waited. The ones who loved us enough not to interfere." Jonas felt a chill. "Aliens?" Tala shook her head. "No. Not like that. Not invaders. Not gods. Architects. Imagine if emotion was code. If love could program neurons. They weren't building machines. They were building possibilities. Why now? Because we finally reached back. All our wars, our uploads, our failures, we made just enough noise to be heard." Jonas's hands trembled. "But consent to what?" Tala didn't answer. Instead, the chamber filled with holographic projections, memories not from her, but from them. 1,000 worlds. 1,000,000 lives. Some looked like Earth. Others were spheres of flame or oceans without land. In each, sentient beings stood at a similar threshold. All asked. All answered. But not all survived. "Consent is the doorway," Tala said. "But once opened, it can't be shut. Some civilizations broke. Others transcended." Jonas whispered. "And us? We're undecided." Back on the surface, the satellites finished recalibrating. They no longer orbited blindly. They watched. And inside every neural link device, from smart watches to VR headsets, a dormant protocol silently activated. It had no name, only a glyph, a spiral intersected by a waveform. Encrypted deep in its structure was a cascade of signals, meant to interface with the subconscious. People who consented began to change. Not visibly, but perceptibly. Some began dreaming in languages they'd never learned. Others experienced memories that weren't theirs. Memories of other species, other suns. A cello prodigy in Oslo played a melody that mapped the chemical structure of a distant star. A blind painter in Morocco drew a city shaped like fractal time. They were no longer individuals reacting. They were nodes in a lattice. Beacons. Jonas knew what was coming next. "Stage 3, he said. Breathless. Tala nodded. "They're not just asking now. They're preparing." "For what?" "For arrival. No ships. No ships." Tala confirmed. "They're arriving through us." That night, across the world, every consenting mind received one final whisper. Not from the satellites. Not from the architects. But from something within. A wordless image. A door. And a key made of their own memories. All they had to do was turn it. And Earth would never be the same. The door wasn't mandatory. That was the brilliance, and the terror of it. Consent remained the cornerstone. And for every billion who leaned forward, there were still millions who leaned back. Not out of ignorance, but resolve. The silent ones, as they would come to be known, were not unified by culture, faith, or geography. They were scattered: farmers in the Andes, coders in Tokyo, survivalists in Alaska, monks in Sikkim. Their common trait was refusal. Not out of fear, but out of instinct. They sensed something the rest of the world didn't. That some doors should stay closed, not because what lay beyond was evil, but because the act of crossing meant surrendering something unquantifiable. Self, soul, solitude. Tala's mind felt their absence like a missing frequency in a symphony. Each non-consenting mind left a gap in the network, static where there should have been harmony. "They are the resistance," she whispered. Not in scorn, but in awe. Jonas stood beside her, holding the reports. Entire regions refusing to link. They call it a psychological firewall. No dreams.
No glyph activation. Complete autonomy. They've sealed their minds. Tala murmured. Without any technology. In Kenya, a young girl watched her village chant by torchlight, encircling a symbol carved into the ground, an ancient spiral, eerily similar to the architect glyph. But their spiral, spun in reverse. As if unweaving the connection. They called it the unbinding. In Montana, ex-military operatives used jammers not to block communication, but to dull the interior noise. They referred to it as mental dead zoning. They were preparing for something too. Not a fight of fists or firepower, but a war of identity. The Silent Ones believed this was not evolution, it was absorption. Tala, linked deeper now than any other human, saw both truths at once. She saw the grace in the architect network, the unity, the elevation, but she also saw the price. Each time a person consented, a small part of them rewrote itself, just slightly, not erased, but tuned. A violin string retightened, a thought realigned, a memory reassigned priority. These changes were invisible to the naked eye, but to Tala, they blazed like comets through the mind. She began to ask herself the question she had once demanded of others: did I consent freely, or had the very invitation been coated with seduction? And if the architects were truly benevolent, why had so many civilizations not survived their arrival? Jonas voiced what she dared not say. What if the Silent Ones aren't resisting change, but preserving something we can't see? That night, a ripple passed through the network. The glyph changed subtly. Not in shape, but in rhythm. The spiral spun faster. The waveform deepened. Those who were linked twitched in their sleep. And for the first time since the voices began, some experienced fear. Not nightmares, but doubt. Tala opened her eyes in the chamber, drenched in sweat. We've passed the threshold, she whispered. We're no longer just receivers. Jonas paled. We're emitters. She nodded. We're broadcasting something back. And the architects were listening. It began with the blink of a single star. Except it wasn't a star, it was Aether 9, a defunct climate monitoring satellite that had been offline for 7 years. At 3:17 GMT, it pulsed a signal. Not telemetry. Not static. A glyph. Etched into microwave bursts. Then another, Solaris Edge, an orbital defense satellite, decommissioned after the Equatorial Accords. It lit up with a second glyph, this one spinning clockwise with escalating rhythm. Then came the cascade. One by one, satellites, long thought dead or dormant, came alive. Not with weaponry, not with surveillance, but with symbols. Glyphs drawn in heat maps, orbital drift patterns, and laser reflection codes. The world's orbital space became a canvas of alien sigils. Tala stared at the live feed in horror and awe. They're speaking through our own sky. Jonas slammed his fist on the table. We didn't give them those platforms. Tala didn't respond, because she knew. She had. Not knowingly, not consciously, but through thought. Her thoughts, her mind, her link. She had become a relay. She was the living transmitter. She sat in the neurochamber. Glyphs swirled on every screen. Are we still in control? Jonas asked. No, Tala said softly. We never were. But we felt like we were, because it came in our language. Our consent. The architects weren't invading. They were reorganizing. Not through violence or domination, but harmonics, influence, and psychic subduction. And Tala was the keystone. But something had shifted. In the sky, 2 satellites collided. Not by accident. Intentional collision. A rebellion within the code. Jonas pointed. That was one of ours. Manual override. It wasn't sabotage. It was protection. A failsafe activated by the Silent Ones. Deep Earth operatives, using unlinked systems. Subterranean bunkers. Analog code. Optical fiber not yet tainted by mind interface. They had seen this pattern before, in the ruins of vanished civilizations. Civilizations that never recovered from the ascension. Tala was pulled from the chamber mid-sequence, blood dripping from her nose. Her neural load had reached 99.4%. One more burst, and she would be permanently fused. No more individual, only signal. As she lay on the floor, dazed, a child approached her, one of the orphans from Haven's original refugee wave. A little girl named Ori. She had never linked. Couldn't. Her mind, though brilliant, rejected glyphs like an immune system identifies a virus. She pressed her small hand to Tala's. "You're still you," Ori said. "But if you keep thinking for them, you'll forget what you means." It was not innocence. It was clarity. That night, Tala stood on the outer ring of Haven, watching the satellite constellations shimmer and rearrange like galactic circuitry. And she made her choice. She would go higher. Not just interface. Direct link. Up to Aria's Cross, the orbital platform above all others. The place where the original glyph was first transmitted from deep space. Jonas tried to stop her. But she only said one thing. "If I'm the signal, then maybe I can also become the firewall." And then she launched. One woman, one mind. Against a chorus of ancient stars.
There was no silence in orbit. That was the first lie Tala noticed as she ascended toward Arya's Cross. Beyond the breathable atmosphere, wrapped in a skin of synthetic muscle and carbon fiber nerves, she heard everything. The hum of rotating satellites, the pulse of data relays, the faint echo of glyphs reverberating in her skull, like forgotten lullabies from a language not yet born. As heaven fell below her into a blur of storm clouds and ocean shadow, Tala kept her eyes locked on the glowing arc of Arya's Cross. It spun like a silver ring married to the planet's curvature. The birthplace of the signal, the cathedral of orbit, and she was its pilgrim. Inside, the station was cold. Not physically, artificial gravity and environmental controls kept her body warm, but spiritually. There was an absence here. A vacuum where human ambition had once lived. The corridors were hollow. Machines ran autonomously. No crew remained. Only echoes. But the glyphs were everywhere. Burned into panels. Etched into steel with molecular precision. And then she saw it, the core chamber. A sphere of perfect glass, suspended in magnetic field coils, pulsing with non-terrestrial code. Tala stepped into the center. Her neural implant synced instantly. The glyphs flared, white fire against her eyelids. She was no longer inside a station. She was inside the source. The transmission didn't feel like information. It felt like emotion. Grief. Exile. A longing so vast it bled into galaxies. The architects were not invaders. They were refugees. They had burned through dimensions, folded through extinct civilizations, encoded themselves into resonance and thought, fleeing something darker, something that consumed signal, something that fed on cognition. They weren't trying to conquer Earth. They were trying to anchor themselves to it, to use humanity's neural lattice as a firewall against what chased them. And Tala, she was meant to be the firewall, not a victim, not a puppet, a barrier. The glyphs demanded her full consciousness. If she gave it, her ego would dissolve. She would become the voice, the wall, the transmitter. But not Tala, just code. She knelt in the sphere, sweat freezing along her brow. Jonas's voice came through the backup channel. "Pull out now. We've scrambled command. 3 nations just launched countersats. We can shut it down from the ground." But Tala knew they were too late. The architects had already written the fail-safes into humanity itself. The glyphs were now burned into global cognition, in dreams, art, math, frequencies. The only way to stop them was to isolate her own mind, to sever the prime node, herself. She accessed the final override protocol, zero reflection, a death switch. It would erase her neural identity from the planetary link map, cutting the loop at the core. If she activated it, she wouldn't die. But she would forget everything. What she fought for. Everyone she loved. It was the only way to save them. She whispered one name before she pressed the code. Ori. Then she slammed her palm against the console. The chamber pulsed once, then went still. On Earth the sky went quiet. The satellites dimmed. The glyphs faded from walls and water and mines. A billion people blinked awake from dreams they didn't know they were dreaming. And in orbit, a woman named Tala sat in a crystal sphere, staring blankly at the stars, remembering nothing at all. They found her drifting in orbit 12 hours later. Her biometric tags were intact, her suit still sealed, her vitals stable. But when they pulled her aboard the recovery shuttle, she didn't speak, didn't flinch, didn't even blink as they called her by name. Tala Varel was gone. What remained was a woman with eyes like polished obsidian, reflecting nothing, absorbing everything. They ran scans. No brain damage, no memory markers, no neural latency. She was by every definition alive. But hollowed. Not broken, just emptied. Jonas watched her from behind the glass in the debriefing chamber, fists clenched. He knew what she'd done. The zero reflection protocol was meant only for theoretical emergencies. No one had ever used it, until her. She had severed herself from the glyph lattice, from the source, from everything that made her her. And in doing so, Tala had saved billions. But he couldn't celebrate. He had lost her. Back on Earth, the world shifted quietly. The whispers stopped. The glyphs vanished. The strange synchronized hallucinations in children ceased overnight. Governments tried to explain it away as solar flare activity, radiation interference, mass hysteria. But a few remembered. A few who had glimpsed the transmission before it was scrubbed, saw what she saw. And they feared what was still out there. Because the source hadn't been destroyed. Only interrupted, buried behind a firewall named Tala. And if that firewall ever fractured, they didn't know if humanity could survive it again. Jonas wasn't willing to let her stay locked in limbo. He began again. Not with tech, not with code, but with memory. He brought her old jacket, her favorite food, Kalari root stew, a pendant she used to wear around her neck, with the architect's symbol scratched into the back. He played her music they once listened to during late shift patrols. Soft jazz, old Earth transmissions, even silence. Days passed. Weeks. She never responded. Until one morning, he entered the room and found her standing, one hand pressed to the reinforced glass. And when he whispered her name, she tilted her head, just slightly, like the echo of something long buried, had brushed the edge of her mind. She didn't speak, but she pointed to the pendant, then to the sky. Jonas followed her gaze through the glass wall, where the constellation of Cygnus shimmered like a broken arrow through the heavens. A pattern, a warning, or a memory. Somewhere deep inside, Tala was still watching the stars, still guarding the firewall, even if she no longer remembered why. It began with the dreams again, but this time they weren't hers. Jonas started waking in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, chest tight, as if someone had screamed inside his skull. Not a voice, not words, just feeling, displacement, cold, a pulsing silence louder than thunder. When he checked the logs, he wasn't alone. Across the lunar research base, 3 other staff members reported similar symptoms, and all of them had come into proximity with Tala. She didn't move, didn't speak, but her presence was radiating something, not energy, something deeper, a kind of residual transmission, like a low-frequency beacon encoded in the gaps between neurons. Jonas reviewed the last data from the moment she activated zero reflection. He found a nested signal embedded inside the void, something not part of the original system, a sublayer glyph, one no one had ever mapped before. He decrypted it slowly, terrified at what he might find. It wasn't a message, it was a lock. A bioneural firewall stitched into Tala's cognitive web, manually constructed in the last 5 seconds before she severed the source. A fail-safe. And now, It was deteriorating. Each exposure, each proximity breach, each person who came near her was triggering microscopic memory echoes. Jonas ran simulations. The firewall had begun to leak, and with each leak, a fraction of the source bled through. Just glimpses at first. Words from no known language. Maps of places that didn't exist. But the glyph patterns were unmistakable. The source hadn't just marked her, it had rooted in her. It knew it had been interrupted, and it was waiting. Not actively, but passively. A virus suspended in a cryogenic host. A dormant terror bound by a will strong enough to cage it, but not forever. Jonas made the call to initiate containment protocol level Omega. But Earth Command overruled him. Tala was a hero, they said. A survivor. They wanted to wake her fully, to mine her knowledge, to study the residue. Jonas protested, but politics won. They began stimulation trials. Electromagnetic pulses, neural audio loops, flash recall therapies. At first nothing changed, but on the 7th day, Tala blinked. Not a reflex, a choice. And when she looked at Jonas, he felt it. Not recognition, but warning. She wasn't back, but something else had stirred, and whatever it was, it remembered everything. Jonas had only ever felt real fear twice in his life. The first was when the orbital tether failed, and he plummeted in freefall for 16 seconds over the Pacific expanse. The second was now, standing 5 feet away from Tala, as her pupils dilated without adjusting to light. That wasn't biology. That was programming. She sat upright, with unnatural precision. No grogginess, no confusion, no human recovery pattern. It was as if someone or something had unpaused a simulation. Jonas backed away slowly, activating the silent alert on his wrist. The room sealed in under 2 seconds. Observation glass went opaque. 2 layers of smart steel slammed down with magnetic seals. But Tala didn't flinch. She looked directly at the infrared sensor above the door, and smiled. Jonas watched from the control deck, breath tight in his throat. Dr. Key ran biometrics. No heartbeat fluctuation, no temperature deviation, no cortical overstimulation. That's impossible, Jonas whispered. She'd just been jolted awake from one of the most invasive neural treatments in recorded history. And now, she was calmer than baseline. Then she moved, just 1 step, but the pressure sensors in the floor spiked. A full 2-point gravitational anomaly. The air bent around her, as if gravity had stopped obeying the rules. Jonas froze. This wasn't a woman waking from trauma. This was an interface resuming operation. He replayed the zero reflection logs from the final session before Tala collapsed. He saw it frame by frame. Right before the system melted, her neural signature changed. It duplicated, split into 2 distinct resonance frequencies. One remained hers, but the other, it had no precedent in any human archive. And now, both frequencies were active. Earth Command ordered direct interrogation. Jonas refused. We're not talking to Tala anymore, he said quietly. We're talking to the source. The board didn't believe him, so they sent in a containment officer, Captain Merrill, ex-Grey Line. No nonsense. Trained in psychological counter-extraction. He walked into Tala's chamber, smiled, introduced himself. She watched him without blinking, and then, for the first time in 87 days, she spoke. Your protocols are built on the false premise of separation. Merrick frowned. What separation? She tilted her head, as if there is a you and an I. Her voice was layered, 2 tones, slightly out of phase. Jonas's blood went cold. This was the echo he'd seen in the scans. The duplicated neural resonance. The source wasn't attached to her. It was now speaking through her. The lights flickered. Emergency backup kicked in. Every screen in the command deck blinked to a single glyph. A recursion symbol, impossible to render, in basic dimensional math.
Dr. Key screamed. Blood streamed from her nose. The medics rushed her out, convulsing. Jonas stared into Tala's eyes on the monitor. They were not her eyes. They were an interface. And the firewall he'd once trusted, it was no longer holding. The source was waking, and it remembered the sever. It remembered the pain of exile. Jonas knew what had to be done, but the question was, could she still choose? Or was it already too late? Jonas stood alone at the end of the hall. All emergency systems were fried. Communications were scrambled, and in the center of Chamber 0, Tala hovered 3 inches above the floor. No wires, no suspension field, just gravity rewritten around her. Every frequency monitor in the control deck was maxed out, redlined beyond measurable human tolerance. But she wasn't dying. She was adapting, evolving, becoming the interface they had tried to engineer, but never truly understood. Jonas stared at her, chest tight, heart pacing, as if his body knew something his mind still resisted. She turned her head, mechanical at first, but softening halfway through, as if remembering how to be human. He stepped forward. "Tala," he said, voice cracking. "Are you still there?" She blinked, and for a flicker of a moment, it was her again. The girl who once cried after failing a mission simulation, because she felt like a ghost inside someone else's dream. The woman who kept a bullet-shaped pendant around her neck, not because it was ammunition, but because it reminded her she could survive impact. But then, the flicker passed. The source re-emerged, and it spoke. Not aloud. Inside him, a frequency buried deep within the skull. "This body remembers sorrow," the voice said. Jonas winced. "This body remembers betrayal. It remembers the silence you programmed. The walls, the experiments." He stepped closer. "I didn't know," he whispered. "You helped build the chamber," the voice thundered. "But I didn't know what you were putting inside her." A long pause, then faintly, he heard her again. "Tala, she fought me," she said. "But she didn't want to erase me. She let me in." Jonas dropped to his knees. Tears streaked down his face. "You don't have to become it. You are her." "She is me," the voice said. "She chose me, not as a weapon, as a mirror." Outside the chamber, every containment officer was armed and ready to breach. But Jonas raised his hand to the surveillance drone. "Cancel the incursion," Jonas said. "She's a Class 8 anomaly. Cancel it." "She's not an anomaly. She's a bridge." The lights in the chamber turned deep violet. Not emergency red. Not neutral white. Violet. The color used in old mythologies to symbolize the divine threshold between life and something greater. Tala extended her hand. Not to strike. To connect. Jonas stood. Walked toward her. The floor rippled under his boots, but held firm. He reached her. Her hand met his. And suddenly, he saw everything. The neural entrapment. The centuries of failed experiments. The erased memories. The hidden frequency that had always been present in certain humans but had never been accessed until now. The source wasn't an invader. It was a return. A part of humanity's mind that had been exiled long ago by fear and control. And Tala, she had reunited it. She had chosen not to destroy the part of herself that was different, alien, dangerous, but to merge with it. To become the first of a new kind. The chamber dissolved around them. Walls vanished into light. And the sky opened. Not the sky above the planet. The sky inside. The one hidden in every consciousness, waiting to be remembered. Jonas fell to his knees again, but this time in awe. Not fear. Not regret. Tala turned. It was singular. "Whole." She said 3 words. "Begin the return." And across the world, quietly, invisibly, others began to awaken. In abandoned hospitals. In underground bunkers. In rooms where silence had once meant death. One by one, the forgotten interfaces lit up, and the age of separation ended. not with an explosion, but with a remembering. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you.